In Victorian London, a single orange could cost a full day's wages for a poor family. For the children of the workhouse, that one piece of fruit was their entire Christmas, and somehow they were grateful for it. If you use these to fall asleep, hit subscribe so you don't miss any. Comment where you're at in the time too. Kind of fun seeing all the different places. Someone from Iceland commented once and I had to Google what time zone that even is. So, we're going back to Victorian London tonight. But hold on, get yourself comfortable first. I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket. This one's worth settling in for. The bitter cold was the first thing Martha felt. Always the cold. It seeped through the thin blanket, through her nightgown, through her skin, right down to her bones. Her eyes flickered open to darkness, just the faintest grey light seeping through frosted windows. Christmas Eve morning in the London workhouse. She was 10 years old, though small enough to pass for 7. 3 years in the workhouse had stunted her growth, but not her spirit. Not yet. Up everyone up. The harsh voice of Mrs. Grimwig, the workhouse matron, shattered the pre-dawn quiet. No lazing about today, floors to scrub, laundry to wash, Christmas doesn't clean itself. Around Martha, 24 girls stirred in their narrow beds. The dormitory was a long, cheerless room with peeling paint and windows that let in nearly as much cold as they did light. The beds were arranged in 2 perfect rows. Military precision demanded even in sleep. "Martha," whispered a small voice from the next bed. "Is it really Christmas tomorrow?" Martha turned to little Betsy, just 6 years old and new to the workhouse. Her parents had died of fever only months ago. "Yes, it is. And you know what that means?" Betsy's eyes widened. "What? Might be pudding for dinner?" And Martha lowered her voice conspiratorially. "They say we might each get an orange." The word hung in the air like magic. Orange, the colour of sunrise, the taste of sunshine. Once a year, on Christmas Day, the benefactors of the workhouse brought oranges, one for each child, the single day of the year when something sweet and bright entered their grey existence. "What's an orange like?" Betsy asked, her voice small with wonder. Martha's chapped lips curved into a smile. "It's the most wonderful thing you'll ever taste, sweet and tangy all at once, and when you peel it, the smell is like heaven might smell." She closed her eyes, remembering. "My mum used to get us one at Christmas, before. Silence. Mrs. Grimwig was suddenly looming over them, her face pinched with annoyance. "Save your chatter for chapel, get dressed and downstairs in 5 minutes, or there'll be no breakfast." The girls scrambled out of bed, shivering as bare feet hit the icy floor. Martha helped Betsy with the buttons of her uniform, a shapeless grey dress with a white apron, identical to what every girl in the workhouse wore. Their breath clouded in front of their faces as they dressed. "You won't believe the size of the fire they'll have going tonight," Martha whispered to Betsy as they made their bed with quick, practiced movements. "Christmas Eve is the one night they let it burn higher than usual." "Is Father Christmas real?" Betsy asked suddenly. Martha's hands stilled on the rough blanket. The question hit her like a physical blow. She remembered asking her own mother the same question years ago in their tiny but happy home, before the fever took her parents, before the workhouse. "Course he is," she said firmly, "but he can't bring much to the workhouse. Too many children, see? That's why the benefactors bring the oranges instead." "Hurry up, girls," another shout from downstairs. Martha grabbed Betsy's hand. "Come on, don't want to miss breakfast. It's Christmas Eve porridge." "Is it different from regular porridge?" Martha grinned. "Nah, still tastes like wallpaper paste, but we tell ourselves it's special anyway." The dining hall was cavernous and cold, with long wooden tables and benches. 100 children sat in silence, shoveling thin porridge into their mouths. The only sound was the scrape of spoons against bowls and the occasional cough. Talking during meals was forbidden. From a seat, Martha could see through a doorway into the kitchen where enormous copper pots were already bubbling. Preparations for tomorrow's Christmas dinner. She nudged Betsy and nodded toward the kitchen. See, they're already cooking for tomorrow. Bet they're making plum pudding. A tall, painfully thin man in a black coat strode into the dining hall. Mr. Penge, the workhouse master. The children instinctively sat straighter. Children, he announced, his voice echoing. Today being Christmas Eve, there will be adjustments to the schedule. A murmur of excitement rippled through the room, quickly silenced by his stern glare. Work duties will continue until 4 o'clock, at which time you will return to your dormitories to wash and change for evening chapel. Following the service, there will be bread and cheese in the dining hall, after which you will retire for the night. He paused, scanning the room. I expect exemplary behaviour from all of you. Our benefactors have been generous this year, and tomorrow's festivities depend on your conduct today. Martha felt a thrill of anticipation. Benefactors meant oranges. Mr. Penge's reference to them could only be a good sign. After breakfast, the children were divided into their work groups. Martha and the older girls were assigned to scrub the entrance hall and main corridors. The work was punishing. On her hands and knees for hours, the harsh lye soap cracking her skin, the cold water making her fingers so numb she could barely feel the brush. Heard they've got a whole crate of oranges coming, whispered Nancy, the girl working beside her. At 13, Nancy was one of the oldest girls and therefore a source of workhouse wisdom. More than usual, might even get a bigger piece this year. Really? Martha scrubbed harder, excitement giving her energy. Where'd you hear that? Cook's assistant told me. Said she saw the order list in Mr. Penge's office. A whole crate from Covent Garden Market. My fingers are turning blue, Betsy whimpered from Martha's other side. The little girl's hands were indeed an alarming shade. Here, Martha whispered, taking Betsy's hands between her own and rubbing vigorously. Got to keep the blood moving. Think of something warm. Like sitting right next to a fire with chestnuts roasting. Never had chestnuts, Betsy said. Me neither, admitted Martha, but I've smelled them roasting in the street vendors' pans. Makes your mouth water something fierce. A shadow fell over them. Less talking, more scrubbing, Mrs. Grimwig snapped. Those floors won't clean themselves. The girls bent to their work again. Martha's back ached and her knees were raw from the hard floor, but she kept going. Christmas was coming, an orange was coming, just one more day of work and then a feast, by workhouse standards at least. As she scrubbed, Martha thought of Christmases before the workhouse. They'd been poor, her family, but happy. Her father worked at the docks. Her mother took in washing. At Christmas, they'd had a small pudding and, if the year had been good, an orange to share among the three of them. Her father would carefully peel it, dividing it into segments with surgical precision, making sure each piece was exactly the same size. One piece of sunshine for each of us, he'd say, his weathered face creasing with a smile. The memory made Martha's eyes sting. She blinked rapidly, focusing on the floor. Crying wouldn't bring them back. Nothing would. The day crawled by. The children's hands grew raw from work. Their stomachs growled with hunger. Dinner was thin soup and a slice of bread, meagre even by workhouse standards, as if to make tomorrow's slightly more generous meal seem all the more magnificent by comparison. As promised, at 4 o'clock they were sent to wash and change for chapel. Change simply meant putting on their slightly less ragged uniforms, saved for Sundays and special occasions. The cold water from the pump in the washroom was like ice, but they scrubbed their faces and hands until they glowed red, knowing that cleanliness would be inspected before chapel. In the girls' dormitory, excitement buzzed like electricity. Christmas was a spark of light in their dreary existence, the one day when the outside world remembered them, the one day when they were children, not just workhouse inmates. "I heard the benefactors are coming tomorrow, wearing fur coats and jewels," one girl said as she braided another's hair. "I heard they're bringing a whole orange for each of us, not just half like last year," said another. "And pudding with real brandy in it." Martha listened to the chatter, her heart beating faster, an entire orange of her own. The thought was almost too wonderful to imagine. When the bell rang for chapel, the children filed out in 2 orderly lines, girls on one side, boys on the other. They were not allowed to speak to each other, except during supervised activities, and even then, interaction between boys and girls was discouraged. Martha spotted her little brother Tom in the boys' line. At 8, he was the spitting image of their father. Same dark hair, same serious expression. He caught her eye and gave a tiny, secret wave. She winked back, their private signal that meant, "I'm okay, are you okay?" He nodded, almost imperceptibly. The chapel was the one beautiful space in the workhouse. For Christmas Eve, it had been decorated with holly and ivy, and actual candles burned in sconces on the walls, a rare extravagance. The children filed into the hard wooden pews, their faces turned up to the warm glow of the candles. Mr. Penge stood at the pulpit, his tall figure casting a long shadow. "Tonight," he intoned, "we remember the birth of our Saviour in humble circumstances. Let his example of humility guide you in your gratitude for the charity shown to you, the undeserving poor." Martha tried not to fidget during the sermon. Mr. Penge droned on about sin and redemption and the virtue of work. She focused instead on the flickering candlelight, the smell of beeswax and pine, the anticipation of tomorrow. After chapel came the promised bread and cheese in the dining hall. It wasn't much, but the very fact that it was an extra meal made it special. Martha managed to sneak her piece of cheese to Tom when the supervisors weren't looking. Boys always got hungrier than girls, she thought. Then it was back to the dormitories. The workhouse quieted as darkness fell completely. Outside, snow began to drift down, turning London into a Christmas scene from a storybook, though the magic rarely reached inside these walls. As she lay in her narrow bed, Martha whispered to Betsy, "One more sleep till Christmas, till oranges." Betsy's eyes were already drifting closed. "Tell me again what they taste like." Martha smiled in the darkness. "Like sunshine, like the best day of summer captured in something you can hold in your hand. You'll see tomorrow." She pulled her thin blanket up to her chin, watching the snow fall outside the window. Despite the cold, despite the hunger and the work, and the dreariness of workhouse life, a small flame of excitement burned in her chest. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow there would be an orange. And for the children of the workhouse, that was everything. Across London, in a grand house on Berkeley Square, another 10-year-old girl awoke on Christmas Eve, but Eleanor Blackwood didn't feel the bite of cold. Her 4-poster bed was heaped with quilts and surrounded by heavy velvet curtains that kept draughts at bay. When she opened her eyes, a fire was already crackling in the grate, tended by a maid who had crept in silently at dawn. "Good morning, Miss Eleanor," said the maid Sarah, drawing back the curtains to reveal a world transformed by snow. "Happy Christmas Eve." Eleanor sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Unlike Martha's dormitory, Eleanor's bedroom was a wonderland of comfort. Papered walls in soft blue, a thick carpet underfoot, shelves lined with books and toys, and a dressing table crowded with silver-backed brushes and crystal bottles. "It's snowing," Eleanor exclaimed, rushing to the window. Below, Berkeley Square was blanketed in white, pristine, except for the tracks of early delivery carts. "How beautiful," Sarah smiled indulgently. "Yes, miss, a proper Christmas snow. Your breakfast is ready whenever you'd like it." Eleanor turned from the window with a little frown. "Will father be at breakfast?" Sarah's smile faltered. "I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood has already gone to his office, miss. Banking matters, even on Christmas Eve, but he promised to be home by luncheon." "And mother?" "Mrs. Blackwood is still asleep. She was quite tired from the dinner party last night." Eleanor nodded, used to this response. Her father, Cornelius Blackwood, was one of London's most successful bankers. Her mother, Caroline, was one of London's most fashionable hostesses. Both roles required much time away from their only child. "I'll dress and come down," Eleanor decided. "The blue wool dress, I think." While Sarah laid out her clothes, Eleanor went to her window seat, kneeling to watch the snow continue to fall. 3 stories below, a ragged child was sweeping the street crossing, hoping for pennies from ladies and gentlemen who wanted to keep their hems clean. The sight made her think of something she'd overheard at her mother's dinner party the night before. "Davis, you're still planning the workhouse visit tomorrow?" a gentleman had asked her father. "Every Christmas, without fail," her father had replied. "Blackwood Bank has been the chief benefactor of St. Bart's Workhouse for 20 years. Tradition, you know. Load of rubbish, if you ask me," another man had muttered. "Spoiling them with treats. They should be grateful for the roof over their heads." Her father had smiled tightly. "I believe in the spirit of Christmas charity, Wellesley, and it's good business besides. The papers always report on it favourably." "Father, may I come too?" Eleanor had asked impulsively, entering the drawing room when she shouldn't have been there at all. She'd been promptly sent back to the nursery with a gentle rebuke, but not before she saw the discomfort on her father's face. Now, watching the crossing sweeper below, Eleanor wondered what the workhouse was really like. She'd heard whispers from the servants, harsh conditions, meagre food, endless work, so different from her own sheltered existence. "Miss," Sarah interrupted her thoughts, "your dress is ready." Dressed in fine blue wool with white lace at the collar and cuffs, Eleanor descended to the breakfast room. Though her parents were absent, the table was set with silver and crystal, a feast laid out on the sideboard, eggs, kippers, toast, porridge with cream, sausages and winter fruits. Eleanor took a small portion of eggs and a piece of toast, then sat alone at one end of the long mahogany table. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Mr. Parker, the butler, entered with the mail. "Good morning, Miss Eleanor. Cook asks if the breakfast is satisfactory." "Yes, thank you," Eleanor replied automatically, though she'd barely tasted it. "Mr. Parker, do you know about the workhouse visit tomorrow?" The butler's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed, miss, an annual tradition for your father." "What's it like there? The workhouse?" Mr. Parker hesitated. "It's not a place you need concern yourself with, Miss Eleanor." "But I want to know," she persisted. "Father's taking gifts there, isn't he?" "Yes, miss. Food baskets, clothing, and I believe oranges for the children." Mr. Parker straightened a fork that was already perfectly aligned. "Your father is most generous." "Oranges?" Eleanor glanced at the crystal bowl in the centre of the table, filled with oranges, apples, and nuts, such common things in her world. "A rare treat for the less fortunate, miss," Mr. Parker explained. "Most workhouse children taste oranges only at Christmas, if at all." Eleanor tried to imagine this, but couldn't. In her home, fruit was always available, changing with the seasons but never absent entirely. The idea that an orange could be a treasured gift seemed impossible. "I'd like to come on the visit," she announced. "Will you tell father when he returns?" "As you wish, miss," Mr. Parker replied non-committally. "Now, I believe Mrs. Wilson is waiting to discuss the decorations for tonight's tree trimming." The housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, was indeed waiting in the drawing room, where servants were setting up an enormous fir tree in front of the bay window. At 8 feet tall, it dwarfed Eleanor, filling the air with the sharp, clean scent of pine. "Ah, Miss Eleanor," Mrs. Wilson said cheerfully, "just in time to approve the decorations. We've brought up the usual ornaments, plus the new ones your mother ordered from Germany." Boxes of treasures were being unpacked. Delicate glass baubles, carved wooden figures, gilded pine cones and tiny candle holders that would be filled with real candles on Christmas Eve. "They're beautiful," Eleanor said, lifting a glass angel to the light. "Will we decorate today?" "This afternoon, miss. The candles will be lit after dinner, of course." Eleanor nodded, wandering among the boxes, her fingers brushed against strings of cranberries and popcorn waiting to be draped on the branches. Another box held paper cones that would be filled with sweets and hung on the tree. "Mrs. Wilson," she said suddenly, "for the workhouse visit tomorrow, what exactly does father take?" The housekeeper looked surprised by the question. "Well, let me see. Baskets with bread, ham, preserves, woolen stockings and caps, and oranges, of course, one for each child." "Just one orange?" "Yes, miss. They're quite special to those children." Mrs. Wilson busied herself arranging ornaments. "Now, about the garlands. Could we send more?" Eleanor interrupted. "More oranges, I mean, and perhaps some of the German sweets mother ordered." Mrs. Wilson's expression softened. "That's very thoughtful, miss. I'll speak to your father about it when he returns. And I want to come along tomorrow," Eleanor added firmly, "to see the workhouse for myself. I'm not sure that's—" "Please, Mrs. Wilson, it's Christmas." The housekeeper sighed. "I'll mention it to your father, but I make no promises. Now, shall we continue with the decorations?" The morning passed in a flurry of Christmas preparations. Eleanor helped the servants hang holly and ivy throughout the house, the dark glossy leaves and bright red berries bringing a touch of nature indoors. Mistletoe was suspended from the chandelier in the entryway, and pine boughs decorated the mantelpieces, filling the house with their fresh scent. In the kitchen, Cook was overseeing the making of mince pies, Christmas puddings, and a magnificent cake covered in snowy white icing. The air was rich with the smells of cinnamon, nutmeg, and brandy. "Might I try a mince pie?" Eleanor asked, peeking into the bustling kitchen. Cook, red-faced from the heat of the stoves, smiled indulgently. "Just one, mind you. The rest are for tonight's dinner and tomorrow." The pie was still warm, the pastry buttery and flaky, the filling rich with dried fruits and spices. Eleanor savoured it, thinking again of the workhouse children. Did they ever taste such things? Just before noon, the front door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and her father's commanding presence. Cornelius Blackwood was a tall man with a thick beard, now dusted with snowflakes, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Eleanor," he exclaimed, seeing her on the stairs, "come give your father a Christmas kiss." She hurried down, inhaling his familiar scent of tobacco and cologne as he embraced her. Despite his frequent absences, she adored him completely. "Father, I want to ask you something," she said earnestly. "About tomorrow." He raised an eyebrow, handing his hat and coat to Mr. Parker. "What about tomorrow, my dear? I want to come with you, to the workhouse." Cornelius frowned, leading her into his study. Unlike the festive drawing room, this was a serious space, leather-bound books lining the walls, a massive desk dominated by ledgers and correspondence. Eleanor, the workhouse is no place for a young lady. It's difficult, the conditions, the people, But isn't that why we help them? Because their lives are difficult? She clasped her hands in front of her, a gesture her mother used when persuading father of something. I want to see where the gifts go. I want to understand. Her father studied her for a long moment. This isn't some Christmas entertainment, Eleanor. It's not like the pantomime or the shop windows at Harrods. I know that, she insisted. Please, father, it would mean so much to me. Cornelius sighed heavily, moving to the window. Below, the snow continued to fall, transforming the squalor of London into something pure and beautiful. Temporarily. Very well, he said finally, but you must stay close to me at all times. Speak only when spoken to. And remember that we are there to provide charity, not to gawk at less fortunate circumstances. Eleanor's heart leapt. Yes, father, I promise. Now, he said, his tone lightening, I believe we have a tree to decorate this afternoon. After luncheon, which her mother missed having only just risen for the day, the family gathered in the drawing room for the tree trimming. It was one of the few activities they did together as a family, a tradition Cornelius insisted upon despite Caroline's complaints that it was terribly German. The Queen and Prince Albert do it, Cornelius would always reply. If it's good enough for Victoria, it's good enough for us. Eleanor stood on a small stepladder, hanging ornaments on the higher branches, while her parents handled the more delicate decorations. The servants had strung cranberries and popcorn and attached the candle holders to the branches. Now the family added the personal touches, glass baubles from Germany, small wooden toys, gilded pine cones, and paper angels. Mother, did you know father is letting me visit the workhouse tomorrow? Eleanor said, carefully hanging a blown glass star. Caroline Blackwood, elegant even in a simple day dress, looked up with alarm. Cornelius, you can't be serious. A workhouse is no place for Eleanor. I've already agreed, Caroline, her father said firmly. It will be educational for her. Educational to see those filthy, disease-ridden... They're just children, Mother, Eleanor interrupted. Children who don't have trees like ours or oranges whenever they want them. Caroline pressed her lips together. I see your father has already filled your head with his charity notions. Next you'll be joining those dreadful women who go slumming in the East End with their pamphlets and Bibles. I just want to see where our gifts go, Eleanor said quietly. That's all. She'll be perfectly safe with me, Cornelius assured his wife. The visit is brief, just long enough to distribute the gifts and speak with the master and matron. Caroline sniffed disapprovingly, but said no more, turning her attention back to the tree. As the short winter day faded to dusk, the tree was completed except for the candles, which would be lit after dinner. Eleanor stepped back to admire their work. It was magnificent, a perfect cone of green dotted with colour and sparkle, surrounded by wrapped packages in tissue paper and ribbons. Now, Cornelius said, I believe it's time to prepare for dinner and evening church service. Upstairs, Sarah helped Eleanor change into her Christmas Eve finery, a dress of deep green velvet with a white lace collar and cuffs. Her dark hair was brushed until it shone and tied back with a matching green ribbon. You look beautiful, miss, Sarah said, adjusting the ribbon, like a Christmas angel. Eleanor studied her reflection in the mirror. The girl who looked back seemed far removed from the workhouse children she'd been thinking about all day. Would they stare at her fine clothes tomorrow? Would they hate her for her good fortune? Sarah, she said suddenly, have you ever been to a workhouse? The maid's hands stilled on her hair. Not personally, miss, no, but my cousin was sent to one after her parents died of the fever. She was just 7. What happened to her? Sarah's face grew sad. She didn't last the winter, the cold, the poor food. It's a hard life, miss. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. I'm going to visit a workhouse tomorrow, with father. Are you, miss? That's unusual. I want to take something special, something from me, not just from father's charity baskets. Eleanor turned from the mirror, her mind made up. Will you help me? After dinner that evening, the family gathered again in the drawing room. Mr. Parker and 2 footmen carefully lit the candles on the tree while the family watched from a safe distance. As the tiny flames caught, the tree seemed to come alive, glowing with magical light that reflected in the ornaments and cast dancing shadows on the walls. Beautiful, breathed Eleanor, momentarily forgetting her plans for tomorrow in the wonder of the moment. Even Caroline seemed moved, her usual cool demeanour softening in the candlelight. It is rather lovely, isn't it? Cornelius put his arm around his wife's waist, pulling her close. Merry Christmas Eve, my dears. For a rare moment, they were simply a family. Mother, father, daughter, bound together by the magic of Christmas Eve. Later, after church service and a late supper, Eleanor prepared for bed, but instead of climbing under her covers, she went to her window seat again. The snow had stopped and a full moon cast silver light over London, making the snow-covered rooftops gleam. Somewhere out there, beyond Berkeley Square, beyond the fashionable West End, was St. Bart's workhouse. Somewhere, other children were going to sleep with dreams not of presents and feasts, but of a single orange. Eleanor reached under her bed, pulling out the small sack she'd prepared with Sarah's help. Inside were 6 oranges taken from the kitchen when Cook wasn't looking, and a handful of sweets wrapped in paper twists. It wasn't much, nothing compared to her own Christmas abundance. But it was something from her, not just from Blackwood Bank's official charity. Tomorrow she would see the workhouse for herself. Tomorrow she would understand a world completely different from her own. The thought made her stomach flutter with both anticipation and fear. As she finally slipped into bed, Eleanor found herself thinking of unknown children in thin blankets, cold rooms, and hard beds. For the first time in her life, her own comfort made her feel slightly guilty. Outside, the moon sailed through the winter sky, shining on rich and poor alike. Christmas was coming to all of London, though what it would bring to each child varied greatly, depending on which side of the city they called home. Christmas morning. The excited whisper rippled through the girls' dormitory before dawn had even thought about breaking. Martha opened her eyes to see Betsy's face hovering inches from her own, the little girl's breath making small clouds in the frigid air. "Is it time?" Martha whispered back, instantly awake despite the early hour. "Is it really Christmas?" "Listen," said Nancy from the next bed. "They're ringing the chapel bells." Sure enough, the distant sound of bells floated through the darkness. Christmas Day, 1853. Even in the workhouse, this was a day unlike any other. Martha sat up, hugging her blanket around her shoulders. Frost had formed intricate patterns on the inside of the windows, and the air bit at her nose and cheeks. Yet there was an energy in the dormitory that even the cold couldn't dampen. "Oranges today," she whispered to Betsy, whose eyes grew wide with anticipation. Unlike normal days, when they would be roused by Mrs. Grimwig's harsh voice, Christmas morning began with the ringing of bells. The children were allowed to wake naturally, a small mercy, but one they appreciated deeply. One by one, the girls slipped from their beds, shivering as they dressed. Their best uniforms identical to their everyday ones, but with fewer patches, and darns had been laid out the night before. They helped each other with buttons and hair, a quiet camaraderie born of shared circumstance. "Think they'll let us sing carols at breakfast?" asked Betsy as Martha braided her hair. "Probably not," said Nancy, "but definitely at dinner when the benefactors come." Martha finished the braid and gave Betsy's shoulders a squeeze. "Come on, let's go down before all the hot water's gone." The washroom was only marginally warmer than the dormitory, heated by a small stove that did little against the December chill. The girls took turns at the pump, gasping as the cold water hit their skin. Martha helped Betsy wash her face, making sure her ears were clean. The matron always checked. "Martha," Betsy asked as they dried off with rough towels, "did you ask Father Christmas for anything?" Martha hesitated. At 6, Betsy still believed. At 10, Martha knew better, but she couldn't bear to break the younger girl's heart. "I asked for a warm day," she said finally, "so we can all be comfortable for once." "I asked for a doll," Betsy confessed, "with a real china face like the one in the toy shop window we saw when we went to church last month." Martha's heart squeezed painfully. "That's a lovely wish," she said, not having the heart to explain that Father Christmas rarely brought such expensive gifts to workhouse children. The breakfast bell rang, summoning them downstairs. The dining hall had been transformed overnight. Holly and ivy decorated the walls, and a small fir branch stood in the centre of each long table, adorned with paper chains made by the children in their rare free moments. "Look," whispered Betsy in awe. "It's beautiful." It wasn't, not really. The decorations were sparse, the paper chains faded from previous years, but compared to the usual barren hall, it seemed magical. Mr. Penge stood at the head table, unusually festive in a red waistcoat. "Children," he announced, "in honour of Christmas Day, a special breakfast will be served. You may speak quietly among yourselves during the meal." A murmur of excitement spread through the room. Speaking during meals was ordinarily forbidden, punishable by loss of food privileges. This was indeed a Christmas miracle. The usual porridge was replaced by bread with a thin scraping of butter and a spoonful of treacle. To children accustomed to the blandest food, this simple change was a feast worthy of kings. "It's so sweet," marvelled Betsy, licking treacle from her lips. Martha smiled, savouring her own portion. She caught sight of Tom across the room, sitting with the other boys. He gave her their secret signal, and she returned it. They were okay. It was Christmas. After breakfast came chapel, where the children sat in rigid rows as the workhouse chaplain delivered a sermon about the Christ child born in poverty, destined for greatness. Martha tried to listen, but her mind kept wandering to the afternoon, when the benefactors would arrive with their gifts and the oranges. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. There were no work duties on Christmas Day, but the children were expected to keep themselves occupied quietly. Some of the younger ones played simple games in corners of the dining hall, while others sat in groups, talking in hushed voices about Christmases past or imagined futures. Martha found a quiet corner with Betsy and a few other girls. "Let me tell you about the Christmas before I came here," she said, drawing them close. It was a story she'd told before, but one they never tired of hearing. "We lived in 2 rooms above a baker's shop. It was always warm because of the ovens below. At Christmas, the baker would give us a loaf of special bread with raisins and cinnamon, and my father would bring home an orange." "A whole one?" asked Betsy, wide-eyed. "A whole one, just for us 3. He'd peel it ever so carefully, making sure not to tear the peel, and then he'd divide it into perfect segments. 1/3 for him, 1/3 for my mother, 1/3 for me." Martha closed her eyes, remembering, "and we'd sit by our little fire, eating our orange segments and telling stories." "What happened to them?" asked a new girl, Emma, who hadn't heard the tale before. Martha's throat tightened. "The fever. 3 years ago. First my mother, then my father a week later. Is that why you came here? You and Tom?" Martha nodded. "No other family to take us in, but we're lucky, in a way. Some workhouses separate brothers and sisters completely. At least here we can see each other. A bell rang, signalling the midday meal. The children filed back into the dining hall, which had been further transformed. The long tables were now covered with white cloths, threadbare and mended, but clean, and at each place was a sprig of holly. And there, at the head table, was the Christmas pudding. Enormous and round, it sat on a platter, dark and rich, with a sprig of holly stuck in the top. The children stared at it in wonder as they took their seats. Mr. Penge stood once more. "Children, before we begin our Christmas dinner, I must remind you of the gratitude you owe to your benefactors who have provided this special meal and the gifts that will follow. I expect exemplary behaviour from each of you." Martha barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the kitchen door, where she could see servants carrying large trays of food. Not the usual thin soup and bread, but something that steamed and smelled of meat and vegetables. "Is that real beef?" whispered Betsy, her nose twitching like a rabbit's. Nancy leaned close. "It is. And there's potatoes too. I saw them peeling mountains of them this morning." The food was served with great ceremony. Each child received a portion of beef stew with potatoes and carrots, small by outside standards, but a feast to the workhouse children. They ate slowly, savouring every bite, making it last. Martha closed her eyes as she chewed a piece of beef, trying to remember the last time she'd tasted meat. Last Christmas, perhaps. The rich flavour was almost overwhelming after months of bland porridge and thin soup. After the main course came the pudding, carried in with great ceremony. It wasn't aflame with brandy as it might have been in a wealthy home, but the children didn't know the difference. To them it was magnificent. Each received a small portion, dense and sweet with dried fruits and spices. Martha watched Betsy take her first bite, the little girl's eyes widening with pleasure. "It's the most delicious thing I've ever tasted," Betsy declared, her voice hushed with reverence. Martha smiled, enjoying her own portion with deliberate slowness. This moment, this rare taste of something special needed to be stretched out, savoured, committed to memory to sustain her through the lean months ahead. As they ate, a murmur of excitement began near the dining hall doors. Martha craned her neck to see what was happening. Her heart skipped a beat. They were here, the benefactors. Led by Mr. Penge, a group of well-dressed ladies and gentlemen entered the hall. They wore fur-trimmed coats and tall hats, and they carried baskets covered with cloths. Behind them came servants with more baskets, and Martha's breath caught a wooden crate, the oranges. The children stilled, watching with wide eyes as the visitors processed into the room. They were not allowed to speak unless spoken to, but a ripple of anticipation passed through them like wind through wheat. Mr. Penge cleared his throat importantly. "Children, I present Mr. Cornelius Blackwood of Blackwood Bank, our most generous benefactor, and his distinguished guests. They have come to bring you Christmas gifts." A tall man with a thick beard stepped forward. Unlike some of the other visitors who were looking around with barely disguised distaste or pity, Mr. Blackwood's expression was kind. "Merry Christmas, children," he said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "It is my pleasure to bring you these small tokens of the season." Small tokens. Martha knew better. Whatever was in those baskets represented more luxury than the workhouse children would see for the rest of the year. And then she noticed something unusual. Standing slightly behind Mr. Blackwood was a girl about Martha's own age, dressed in a green velvet dress with a white fur muff. She was staring around the dining hall with wide eyes, taking in everything, the sparse decorations, the children in their identical uniforms, the remains of the Christmas pudding on their plates. A girl, a benefactor's daughter. Martha had never seen a child accompany the Christmas visitors before. The servants began distributing the basket's contents. Each child received a pair of woolen stockings, a cap, and an apple. More useful than exciting, but the children accepted them with genuine gratitude. Warm stockings were a treasure when you owned only one pair. Martha pulled on her new stockings immediately, sighing with pleasure at their softness. Beside her, Betsy was examining her apple with the reverence usually reserved for jewels. "It's so red," she whispered, "and shiny." But the best was yet to come. Mr. Blackwood himself stepped forward as the wooden crate was opened, revealing neat rows of oranges, bright spots of colour in the drab surroundings. "And now," he announced, "a special Christmas treat for each child." The distribution began. Each child stepped forward when their name was called, curtsied or bowed to the benefactors, and received their orange with cupped hands, as if accepting something precious beyond measure. "Martha Watts," called Mrs. Grimwig, reading from the ledger. Martha stood, smoothing her apron with suddenly trembling hands. She approached Mr. Blackwood, dropping into the curtsy she'd been taught. "Merry Christmas, Martha," he said kindly, placing an orange in her outstretched hands. "Thank you, sir," she replied, the ritual response she'd been taught. "God bless you for your generosity." But as she took the orange, her eyes met those of the girl in green velvet. There was curiosity in that gaze, and something else, a kind of wonder, as if Martha were some exotic creature from a distant land. The orange was heavy in her hands, its skin rough and dimpled, its colour vibrant against her pale fingers. She could already smell its citrus scent, sharp and sweet. Her mouth watered, but she wouldn't eat it yet. This treasure would be saved, prolonged, made to last. "Elizabeth Foster," Mrs. Grimwig called, and Betsy stepped forward for her turn. Martha returned to her seat, cradling her orange carefully. Around her, other children were doing the same, examining their treasures with reverent fingers, lifting them to their noses to inhale the scent. Nobody ate their orange. Not yet. This was too precious to rush. After every child had received their gift, Mr. Penge instructed them to sing carols for their benefactors. They stood in their neat rows, and their voices, thin from poor nutrition but sweet with youth, filled the dining hall with "God rest ye merry gentlemen" and "The Holly and the Ivy." Martha sang automatically, the familiar words coming easily, but her attention was on the girl in green velvet. She was standing slightly apart from the other visitors, watching the children with an intensity that was almost unsettling. When their eyes met again, the girl smiled hesitantly. Martha looked away quickly. It wouldn't do to be caught staring at the benefactors. Mrs. Grimwig had warned them about that. When the carols were finished, Mr. Blackwood made a short speech about charity and goodwill, which the children listened to with polite attention. Then, with a final "Merry Christmas," the visitors prepared to leave. As they filed out, Martha noticed the girl in green velvet lagging behind, looking back over her shoulder. Their eyes met one final time, and Martha had the strangest feeling that the girl wanted to say something to her. But then one of the other visitors, a woman in a fur-trimmed cloak, took the girl's arm and hurried her along. And then they were gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume, the warmth of new woolen stockings, and the treasure of oranges. The remainder of Christmas Day passed in a haze of unusual leisure. The children were allowed to play quiet games in the dining hall, or to sit in groups talking. Some of the younger ones fell asleep, worn out by the excitement and the unaccustomed rich food. Martha found Tom during this free time, and they sat together in a corner, comparing their treasures. "Did you get stockings too?" she asked, showing him hers. He nodded. And a cap. It's actually warm. He touched the orange in his lap. Are you going to eat yours now? Martha shook her head. Not yet. I'm saving it. Me too. Tom looked around to make sure no one was watching, then leaned closer. I saw you looking at that girl, the one in the green dress. I wasn't looking, Martha protested. Not really. She was looking at you too. Wonder why they brought her. Martha shrugged. Maybe to show her how lucky she is, to see how the poor live. Did you see her fur muff? Bet that cost more than everything we own put together. Probably, Martha agreed, but she seemed nice. She smiled at me. Tom made a dismissive noise. They all smile on Christmas Day. It's the rest of the year they forget we exist. Martha couldn't argue with that. The benefactors came once a year, distributed their gifts, accepted the children's gratitude, and departed, their charitable duty done until next Christmas. But still, there had been something different about the girl in green velvet, something in her eyes that wasn't pity or disgust or the blank charity-minded kindness of the other visitors. As the short winter day faded to dusk, the children were given bread and cheese for their supper plain fare, but still better than usual, and sent to their dormitories earlier than normal. The excitement of the day had tired them out, and even the usually restless ones settled quickly. In the girls' dormitory, Martha sat on her bed, her orange cradled in her hands. Around her, other girls were similarly engaged, examining their treasures in the fading light. "When will you eat yours?" Betsy asked from the next bed, her own orange clutched tightly. "Not yet," Martha said. "I'm saving it for a special moment." "When?" Martha considered. "Maybe tomorrow, or the next day. I want to make it last." Nancy, more practical, had already devised a plan. "I'm going to eat half tomorrow and save half for New Year's Day. That way I get 2 treats instead of 1. The other girls nodded appreciatively at this wisdom. As darkness fell completely, Mrs. Grimwig came through to check that they were all in bed. For once, her manner was almost gentle. "Sleep well, girls," she said. "Merry Christmas." When she had gone, Martha lay in her narrow bed, the orange on her pillow beside her head. Its scent was subtle but distinct, a sweet reminder of the world outside the workhouse walls, a world of sunshine and warmth and fruit that grew on trees instead of arriving once a year in a wooden crate. She thought again of the girl in green velvet. What was her Christmas like? A tree with real candles, probably, mountains of presents, as much fruit as she could eat, any day of the year, yet there had been something in those eyes, a kind of loneliness perhaps. It was hard to imagine that a girl with so much could feel anything but happiness. But Martha had seen something there, something familiar. Outside, snow began to fall again, dusting the windowsill with white. Martha pulled her blanket higher, grateful for her new woolen stockings keeping her feet warm. Beside her, Betsy was already asleep, her orange clutched to her chest like a doll. Despite the cold, despite the hard bed and thin blanket, despite the knowledge that tomorrow would bring a return to the usual workhouse routine, Martha felt a strange contentment. Today had been special. Today she had been given an orange, a pair of warm stockings, and a meal with real meat and pudding. And perhaps, though she hardly dared acknowledge the thought, she had made a connection, however brief, with someone from the outside world, someone who had looked at her not as a workhouse inmate, a number in a ledger, but as a girl, a person. With that comforting thought, Martha drifted into sleep, the orange's gentle scent following her into dreams of sunshine and trees laden with golden fruit. Eleanor woke to the gentle sound of Sarah drawing back her bed curtains. Outside, snow was falling again, soft flakes drifting past her window like scattered sugar. "Merry Christmas, Miss Eleanor," Sarah said, her face wreathed in smiles. "A beautiful morning, and look, Father Christmas has been..." At the foot of Eleanor's bed lay a stocking, bulging with small parcels wrapped in coloured paper and ribbon. A larger pile of presents waited on a table nearby, each one beautifully wrapped. Eleanor sat up, excitement fluttering in her stomach despite her thoughts from the night before. Christmas morning held magic even for the most troubled heart. "What time is it?" she asked, reaching for the stocking. "Just past 7, miss. Your parents aren't up yet." "But I thought you might like to open your stocking presents." Sarah busied herself at the fireplace, adding coal to the already crackling fire. Eleanor tipped the contents of the stocking onto her counterpane. Out tumbled an assortment of small treasures chocolate wrapped in silver foil, a tiny doll with a porcelain face, a kaleidoscope, hair ribbons in every colour, a wooden puzzle, and at the very bottom, an orange. She picked up the orange, turning it in her hands, just like the ones the workhouse children would receive today. Except this was just one small gift among many, not a once-a-year treasure. "Will you be going with your father to the workhouse today, miss?" Sarah asked, laying out Eleanor's Christmas dress red velvet with white lace trim, far more elaborate than yesterday's blue wool. "Yes," Eleanor replied, still looking at the orange. "Father agreed yesterday." Sarah's hand stilled for a moment. "It'll be an education for you, miss, though perhaps not a pleasant one." "What's it like, really?" Eleanor set aside the orange and looked up at her maid. "You said your cousin was in one." Sarah's face grew sombre. "It's a hard life, miss. Cold rooms, little food, endless work. The children rise before dawn and work until dark, with lessons squeezed in when they can. They wear the same uniform every day, sleep in dormitories with dozens of others, and rarely get enough to eat." She hesitated. "My cousin wrote to my mother once before she died, said the worst part was being hungry all the time." Eleanor tried to imagine it: constant hunger, endless work, no privacy, no pretty dresses or toys or books. It seemed impossible, like something from a particularly grim fairy tale, not real life in London. "But today they get oranges," she said softly, "and stockings and caps. Father told me." "Yes, miss. Christmas is the one day of brightness in their year." Sarah turned back to the fire. "They'll remember it for months afterward." Eleanor thought about this as Sarah helped her dress and arranged her hair. The red velvet dress was new, made specially for Christmas Day, with a full skirt supported by layers of petticoats and a white lace collar that tickled her chin. Her dark hair was brushed until it shone, then tied back with a matching red ribbon. "You look beautiful, miss," Sarah said, standing back to admire her work. "Like a Christmas angel." Eleanor studied herself in the mirror. The girl who looked back was clean, well-fed, beautifully dressed, nothing like the workhouse children she'd soon meet. Would they hate her for her good fortune, or would they, like the crossing sweeper boy who sometimes smiled at her, simply accept that the world was arranged this way, with some born to plenty and others to want? Downstairs, Eleanor found the drawing room transformed by Christmas magic. The tree, lit last night with real candles, now presided over a sea of wrapped gifts. Holly and ivy adorned every surface, and a fire blazed in the grate, filling the room with warmth and the scent of burning apple wood. Her father was already there, dressed in his finest morning suit, examining a book from one of his unwrapped gifts. "Merry Christmas, my dear," he exclaimed, setting aside the book to embrace her. "You look positively festive." "Merry Christmas, Father," Eleanor replied, breathing in his familiar scent of tobacco and bay rum. "Are there presents to open before breakfast?" Cornelius laughed. So eager. "Yes. I believe we can open a few while we wait for your mother. She's always late on Christmas morning." It was a family joke that Caroline Blackwood, so punctual for social engagements, could never seem to rise on time for family celebrations. Eleanor suspected it was her mother's way of expressing how little she valued these moments compared to her dinner parties and charity balls. Eleanor and her father sat before the tree, and he handed her a large rectangular package wrapped in silver paper and tied with blue ribbon. "This one first, I think," he said with a smile. Eleanor carefully unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound book with gilt edges. "The Arabian Nights," she read from the cover. "Oh, Father, thank you. I've been wanting to read these stories." "I thought you might enjoy some adventures," he said, pleased by her reaction. "Though perhaps not as adventurous as our expedition to the workhouse this afternoon." Eleanor looked up at him. "I've been thinking about that. The oranges we're taking, could we bring more? One seems so small." Cornelius's expression softened. "It's not just the orange, Eleanor. It's what it represents. Something rare, something special, something that marks Christmas as different from ordinary days." "But we have bowls of oranges all winter," she persisted. "Couldn't we give each child 2 at least?" Her father sighed. "The workhouse guardians have very specific ideas about charity, my dear. Too much, they believe, will make the children discontent with their lot. It's a delicate balance. But besides," he continued gently, "we're already bringing stockings, caps and apples, as well as provisions for a special dinner. The bank makes a substantial donation each year to support the workhouse." Eleanor nodded, not entirely satisfied, but understanding that she couldn't change the system in one Christmas day. Her mother entered then, elegant in a morning dress of deep blue silk. "Merry Christmas, darlings," she said, kissing Eleanor's cheek and accepting a kiss from her husband. "I see you've started without me." "Just one present, Mother," Eleanor assured her. "Father gave me the Arabian Nights." "How educational," Caroline said without much interest. "Shall we continue? I believe there's something from Paris for you, Eleanor." The next hour passed in a flurry of unwrapping. Eleanor received more books, a new writing desk, a set of watercolours with real sable brushes, a doll from Paris with a complete wardrobe, hair ornaments, a silver locket, kid gloves, and more sweets than she could possibly eat. Each gift was met with genuine thanks, but as the pile grew, Eleanor found herself thinking about the children at St. Bart's workhouse, each receiving their 1 orange, 1 pair of stockings, 1 cap. The contrast was so stark it made her stomach tighten uncomfortably. After all the gifts had been opened, the family moved to the breakfast room. The table was laid with silver and crystal, and the sideboard groaned under the weight of the Christmas breakfast, a ham glazed with honey and studded with cloves, devilled kidneys, scrambled eggs, kippers, toast, muffins, and coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Eleanor. Eleanor took small portions of everything, more out of politeness than hunger. The excitement of the morning had left her with little appetite, and thoughts of the workhouse visit still occupied her mind. "You're quiet this morning, Eleanor," her mother observed, delicately buttering a piece of toast. "Are you not feeling well?" "I'm fine, Mother. Just thinking about this afternoon." Caroline's expression cooled. "Ah, yes. The workhouse visit. I still think it most unsuitable for a young lady, but your father insists." It will be educational, Cornelius said firmly. Eleanor should understand that not everyone is as fortunate as we are. There are more pleasant ways to learn that lesson, Caroline replied. A visit to the charity hospital, perhaps, or one of my ladies' committees. The workhouse is so sordid. It's reality, Caroline, for thousands of London's children. Eleanor listened to this exchange with growing discomfort. Her mother spoke as if workhouse children were a different species, something unpleasant to be kept at a distance. Her father, while more sympathetic, still viewed them primarily as objects of charity rather than as individuals. Mother, Eleanor said suddenly, do you think the workhouse children will like their oranges? Caroline looked surprised by the question. I'm sure they'll be appropriately grateful, dear, though whether they truly appreciate quality fruit is another matter. They get only one orange a year, Eleanor persisted. At Christmas. Yes, well, that's the point of charity, isn't it? To provide treats they wouldn't otherwise receive. Caroline sipped her coffee. Though personally, I think practical gifts would be more useful. Sturdy shoes, for instance, or sensible undergarments. They receive practical items as well, Cornelius interjected. The stockings and caps are quite serviceable, and the bank's donation helps fund their education and apprenticeships when they're old enough. Eleanor fell silent again, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. She had already decided that the 6 oranges hidden in her room would go with her to the workhouse regardless of what her parents thought about appropriate charity. After breakfast, the family attended Christmas service at St. George's Church in Hanover Square. The church was beautifully decorated with evergreens and candles, and the choir sang carols that made Eleanor's heart swell with the beauty of it all. The sermon was about the Christ child born in poverty, destined for greatness, not unlike the sermon being delivered at that very moment in the workhouse chapel across London. Eleanor found herself wondering what the workhouse children thought about Christmas. Did they see it as a brief respite from their harsh lives? Did they resent the once-a-year charity that reminded them of all they lacked? Or did they, like her, find magic in the day despite its complications? After church came Christmas dinner, served at 2:00 in the dining room. The table was resplendent with the family's best silver, crystal and china. A centerpiece of holly, ivy and white chrysanthemums ran down the middle, interspersed with silver candelabra holding red candles. The meal itself was a showcase of the cook's talents and the family's Wealth oyster soup to start, followed by a roast goose with all the trimmings, then a magnificent beef roast, game pies, vegetables prepared in a dozen different ways, and finally the Christmas pudding, brought in a flame with brandy and greeted with applause from the family. Again, Eleanor ate little, though she praised each dish politely. Her thoughts kept returning to the workhouse, to the children there, to their Christmas dinner, which, while special by their standards, couldn't possibly compare to this abundance. "What time are we leaving for St. Bart's, Father?" she asked as the pudding was being served. 3:30, he replied, checking his pocket watch. "The carriage is ordered for then." Caroline sighed. "I still think this is most unsuitable, Cornelius, especially on Christmas Day. Surely the bank's donation and the usual gifts would suffice without you actually going there. The personal touch matters, my dear. The workhouse master expects it, and frankly, it's good for business. The papers always mention it favourably. At least you're not taking Eleanor into the actual dormitories or workrooms," Caroline continued. "Just the dining hall for the distribution, I assume?" "Of course, it will be perfectly proper and sanitary." Eleanor listened to this exchange with growing frustration. They were discussing the visit as if it were a business transaction or a social obligation, not an opportunity to bring joy to children who had so little. "May I be excused, please?" she asked suddenly. "I need to prepare for the visit." Her parents looked surprised, but her father nodded. "Of course, my dear. We leave in an hour." Upstairs, Eleanor asked Sarah to help her prepare for the outing. The maid helped her change from her red velvet dress to ostentatious, Eleanor decided, for a workhouse visit into the blue wool from yesterday, still formal but less showy. And I'll need my warmest cloak, Eleanor added. And my muff. Yes, miss. And your hat with the blue feather? Eleanor nodded, then hesitated. Sarah, I have something to show you. She went to her wardrobe and pulled out the small sack containing the 6 oranges and sweets she'd secreted away the night before. I want to take these to the workhouse, she explained. Extra oranges for some of the children, but I don't want my parents to know. Sarah's eyes widened. Miss Eleanor, that's very kind, but if your father found out... He won't. I'll hide them in my muff. Please, Sarah, you told me yourself how precious an orange is to them. The maid hesitated, then nodded. All right, miss, but be careful. The workhouse staff might not appreciate you giving extra to some children and not others. I'll find a way, Eleanor said confidently. I just need to get them there. Sarah helped her tuck the oranges and sweets into her muff, arranging them so they weren't obvious. The white fur was capacious enough to hide the contraband, though it made the muff heavier than usual. There, Sarah said, adjusting Eleanor's hat. No one would suspect a thing. Thank you, Sarah, Eleanor said warmly. You're a true friend. The maid blushed at this unusual familiarity. Just doing my job, miss, and it's a kind thing you're doing. Those children have so little. Downstairs, Eleanor found her father waiting in the entrance hall, dressed in his heavy overcoat and top hat. The butler was holding a stack of wicker baskets, each covered with a cloth. Ah, there you are, Cornelius said. Ready for our charitable expedition? Eleanor nodded, clutching her muff close to her body, conscious of its unusual weight. The carriage is ready, sir, Mr. Parker announced, and the special parcels are loaded. Excellent. Cornelius turned to his wife, who had appeared at the top of the stairs. We'll be back in time for evening tea, my dear. Caroline descended halfway, not bothering to come all the way down. Do be careful, Eleanor. Those places are breeding grounds for all manner of disease. Yes, mother, Eleanor replied, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. I'll be careful. Outside, the family's carriage waited, a handsome black conveyance with the Blackwood crest on the door. The coachman sat up top, wrapped in blankets against the cold, while a footman stood ready to help them board. Eleanor climbed in, settling on the plush velvet seat. Her father followed, and the footman closed the door behind them. With a jerk, the carriage set off, the horses' hooves muffled by the snow covering the streets. As they travelled east from the fashionable environs of Berkeley Square, the character of London changed. The grand houses gave way to narrower streets, shops, and eventually the crowded, dilapidated buildings of the poorer districts. Eleanor peered out the window, fascinated by this part of the city she rarely saw. "Is it very far, father?" she asked as they passed through an area where ragged children played in the streets despite the cold and snow. "Not much further," he replied, watching her closely. "St. Bart's is in Smithfield, near the meat market." Eleanor observed the street scenes with growing dismay. Women in threadbare shawls hurried along the pavement, some carrying parcels or baskets, others holding the hands of small children. Men in patched coats gathered outside public houses, seeking warmth and companionship. Older children, thin and pale, darted between carts and carriages, some begging, others simply playing as children do, regardless of circumstances. "Are all these children poor, father?" she asked, her voice small. Cornelius nodded. "Many of them, yes, though not as poor as those in the workhouse. These at least have homes and families, however humble. Eleanor thought about this. Having a home and family, even in poverty, seemed preferable to the institutional care of the workhouse. Yet, her father had told her that many workhouse children were orphans with nowhere else to go. What choice did they have? The carriage turned onto a broader street, then through a gate into a courtyard. Before them loomed St. Bart's Workhouse, a grim institutional building of grey stone, 4 stories high, with small windows and an air of cheerless efficiency. "Here we are," Cornelius said as the carriage came to a halt. "Remember what I told you, Eleanor. Speak only when spoken to, stay close to me, and remember that we are here to provide charity, not to gawk." Eleanor nodded solemnly, clutching her muff with its hidden treasures. "Yes, father." The footman opened the door, and they descended into the snowy courtyard. Servants began unloading the baskets from the back of the carriage, following as a tall, thin man in a black coat emerged from the building to greet them. "Mr. Blackwood," the man said, bowing slightly. "How good of you to come, and on Christmas Day itself. The children are most eager for your visit." "Mr. Penge," Cornelius replied, shaking the man's hand. "May I present my daughter, Eleanor? She expressed a wish to accompany me this year." Mr. Penge's eyebrows rose slightly as he looked at Eleanor. "Indeed, how unusual, but most welcome, of course. The children will be delighted to see a young lady among our visitors." Eleanor curtsied as she'd been taught, keeping her eyes modestly lowered. "Thank you for allowing me to come, sir." "The children are assembled in the dining hall," Mr. Penge continued, leading them toward the building. "We've just finished our Christmas dinner, which was most generous thanks to your donation, Mr. Blackwood." As they entered the workhouse, Eleanor was struck by the smeller combination of boiled cabbage, lye soap, and too many bodies in too little space. The corridors were clean but stark, with bare stone floors and whitewashed walls. Their footsteps echoed as they walked, making her uncomfortably aware of the sound of her own breathing. Through windows in the corridor, she caught glimpses of various rooms' dormitories with rows of narrow beds, workrooms with long tables and benches, a classroom with slates hanging on the wall. Everything was ordered, regimented, institutional. They reached a set of double doors, which Mr. Penge pushed open with a flourish. "The dining hall," he announced. Eleanor stepped inside and felt her breath catch. Before her were rows and rows of children, hundreds of them. It seemed all dressed in identical grey uniforms, all sitting in perfect stillness, all watching the doorway with wide, expectant eyes. This was the moment she had been anticipating and dreading since yesterday. This was where she would see firsthand how the other half of London lived. This was where she would meet the children who considered a single orange the height of luxury. And somewhere in that sea of grey uniforms and pale faces was a girl with whom she would forge an unexpected connection, though neither of them knew it yet. The dining hall fell utterly silent as Eleanor entered behind her father and Mr. Penge. Hundreds of eyes followed their progress, some curious, some wary, all attentive. Eleanor felt a flush creep up her neck at being the object of such scrutiny. She'd never seen so many children in one place before, let alone children who lived such different lives from her own. "Children," Mr. Penge announced, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "As I told you earlier, we are honoured to welcome Mr. Cornelius Blackwood of Blackwood Bank, our most generous benefactor, and this year we are additionally blessed by the presence of his daughter Miss Eleanor Blackwood." A murmur rippled through the assembly at this news. A child benefactor was something new, something unexpected. Eleanor clutched her muff tighter, feeling the weight of the oranges hidden inside. Her eyes scanned the rows of faces, wondering which children she might give her secret gifts to. There were so many of them, all looking so alike in their grey uniforms. "Thank you, Mr. Penge," her father said, stepping forward. "It is my pleasure, as always, to bring some Christmas cheer to St. Bart's. The children look well, a testament to your excellent management." Eleanor glanced at the well children, noting their thin faces and shadowed eyes. If this was well, she hated to imagine what unwell might look like. "We have brought the usual gifts," Cornelius continued, gesturing to the servants who were arranging baskets at the front of the room. "New stockings and caps for each child, apples, and of course the traditional Christmas orange." At the mention of oranges, Eleanor saw several children sit up straighter, their eyes brightening. She remembered what her father had said. It wasn't just the orange itself, but what it represented, a once-a-year luxury, a taste of something beyond their daily existence. "The children have prepared carols to thank you for your generosity," Mr. Penge said. "If you would like to be seated." Chairs had been arranged at the front of the hall for the visitors. Eleanor sat beside her father, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap over her muff. She felt conspicuous in her blue wool dress and fur-trimmed cloak, so obviously different from the children in their identical grey uniforms. At a nod from Mr. Penge, the children stood and began to sing. Their voices, thin but sweet, filled the hall with "God rest you merry gentlemen." Despite their circumstances, there was a purity to their singing that made Eleanor's throat tighten. As they sang, she scanned the rows, her gaze stopping on a girl about her own age with dark hair and serious eyes. Unlike some of the other children who stared at Eleanor with open curiosity, this girl watched her with a more measured gaze, as if trying to understand something. When the carol ended, Mr. Penge instructed the children to remain standing for the distribution of gifts. They would come forward by dormitory group, receive their gifts with a curtsy or bow, and return to their seats. The first group approached, young boys, some no older than 5 or 6. They lined up with military precision, each accepting their stockings, cap, apple, and orange with a rehearsed "Thank you, sir. God bless you for your generosity." Eleanor watched, fascinated and disturbed in equal measure. These children had clearly been drilled in the proper expression of gratitude. Their thanks seemed genuine. How could it not be when receiving such coveted items? But the uniformity of their responses felt artificial, imposed from above rather than spontaneously offered. Group after group came forward. Eleanor observed them all, but her eyes kept returning to the dark-haired girl, who was in one of the last groups to approach. There was something about her, a dignity, a spark of something that the workhouse hadn't quite extinguished. When the girls' group was finally called, Eleanor sat up straighter. The girl approached with her dormitory mates, all curtsying in unison before Mr. Blackwood. "Martha Watts," called the workhouse matron, reading from a ledger. The dark-haired girl stepped forward, dropping into a perfect curtsy. Eleanor's father placed an orange in her outstretched hands. "Thank you, sir," Martha said, her voice clear and steady. "God bless you for your generosity." As she straightened, her eyes met Eleanor's. There was a moment, brief but electric, of connection between them, not mistress and servant, not benefactor and recipient, but simply girl and girl seeing each other across the vast divide of circumstance. Martha moved away, returning to her seat with her treasures. Eleanor watched her go, suddenly certain that this was one of the children who should receive an extra orange. The distribution continued until every child had received their gifts. None ate their oranges, Eleanor noticed. Instead, they held them carefully, as if they were made of glass, occasionally lifting them to their noses to inhale the scent. When the last child had been served, Mr. Penge invited the visitors to walk among the tables and speak with the children. This, Eleanor realized, was her chance. "Father," she said quietly, "may I walk around and talk to some of the children?" Cornelius looked surprised, but pleased. "Of course, my dear. Just remember what I told you." Eleanor nodded and stood, still clutching her muff. She moved deliberately toward the table where Martha Watts sat with other girls her age, conscious of the many eyes following her progress. The girls fell silent as she approached, watching her warily. Up close, their poverty was even more apparent. Chapped hands, thin faces, hair cut short for practicality rather than style. "Hello," Eleanor said, suddenly shy. I hope you're having a happy Christmas." The girls murmured polite responses, clearly unsure how to interact with this unexpected visitor. Only Martha met her gaze directly. "Thank you for the oranges, miss," Martha said. "They're our favourite part of Christmas." Eleanor smiled, relieved at this opening. "Do you save them or eat them right away?" "Save them," Martha replied. "Most of us, anyway. Make them last as long as possible." "I've never had to save an orange," Eleanor admitted, then wished she hadn't when she saw the flicker in Martha's eyes. "I mean, we have them all the time. They're not special for us." An awkward silence fell. Eleanor mentally kicked herself for her tactlessness. She'd made it obvious just how different their worlds were. "Is this your first time visiting a workhouse, miss?" Martha asked finally. "Yes," Eleanor said, grateful for the question. "Father comes every year, but this is my first time." "What do you think of it?" another girl asked, smaller than Martha, with wide, curious eyes. Eleanor hesitated, unsure how to answer honestly without being offensive. "It's different from what I expected. Cleaner." This drew a few smiles. "Mr. Penge has us scrubbing from dawn till dusk," Martha said with a hint of wry humour. "Cleanliness is next to godliness, he says." "Do you go to school here?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. 3 hours a day, Martha explained. Reading, writing, arithmetic and Bible study. The rest is work. Cleaning, laundry, sewing for us girls. The boys do heavier work. Eleanor tried to imagine this schedule. Rising before dawn, working all day with just a few hours for lessons, eating plain food, wearing the same clothes every day. It seemed impossibly bleak. "What about play, games?" she asked. The smallest girl, Betsy, Eleanor heard another child call her, laughed outright at this. "Play? When would we do that?" "Sundays, sometimes," Martha corrected gently. "After chapel, if we've been good." Eleanor became aware that her father was watching her from across the room. She needed to act quickly if she was going to give away her secret oranges. "I have something for you," she said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no officials were nearby. "But I can only give it to a few of you, and you must hide it until later." The girls looked at her with sudden wariness, as if suspecting a trick. Only Martha seemed more curious than suspicious. "What is it, miss?" she whispered. Eleanor opened her muff just enough to reveal one of the oranges. "Extra oranges, and some sweets. I wish I could give one to everyone, but I only managed to bring 6. Martha's eyes widened. "Miss, you shouldn't. If Mr. Penge found out—" "He won't if you're careful," Eleanor insisted. "Please, I want you to have them." After a moment's hesitation, Martha nodded. "Betsy should have one, and my brother Tom, he's over with the boys." Eleanor carefully slipped an orange and a few sweets to Martha, who immediately tucked them into the pocket of her apron. She did the same for Betsy and 3 other girls at the table, each of whom received the contraband with a mixture of shock and delight. "Which one is your brother?" Eleanor asked, looking toward the boys' tables. "There," Martha pointed discreetly. "Dark hair, blue patch on his right sleeve." Eleanor nodded. "I'll try to give him one before we leave." "Why are you doing this?" Martha asked suddenly, her voice barely audible. Eleanor blinked, unprepared for the question. I just thought everyone should have a little extra at Christmas." Martha studied her face, as if searching for some hidden motive. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slightly. "Thank you," she said simply. "Eleanor," her father's voice called from across the room. "We must be going soon." "I have to go," Eleanor said regretfully, "but I'll try to give one to Tom first." She made her way toward the boys' tables, moving casually as if just touring the room. When she reached Tom's table, she paused, ostensibly to admire their new caps. "Those look very warm," she said, opening her muff just enough to slip the last orange and sweets to Tom. "Merry Christmas." The boy's eyes widened as he felt the weight of the orange, but he gave no other sign of surprise. Like his sister, he had learned the art of concealment. "Thank you, miss," he said, the same rehearsed phrase he'd offered her father, but with an undertone of genuine gratitude that made her smile. Her mission accomplished, Eleanor returned to her father's side. Cornelius was deep in conversation with Mr. Penge about workhouse administration and barely noticed her return. "The donation from Blackwood Bank will cover new slates for the schoolroom," Mr. Penge was saying, "and perhaps some improvements to the laundry facilities." "Excellent, excellent," Cornelius nodded. "And the apprenticeship program for the older children. Proceeding well. 3 boys placed with a carpenter this year, 2 with a cobbler. The girls, of course, go into domestic service when they're old enough." Eleanor half listened to this exchange, her attention still on the children. They were sitting quietly with their treasures, waiting for the visitors to leave so they could, return to their normal routine? She realized she had no idea what happened in a workhouse after the benefactors departed on Christmas Day. "We've taken enough of your time, Mr. Penge," her father was saying, checking his pocket watch. "We should return home before the snow gets worse." Mr. Penge bowed. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. The children will see you out with a final carol." At his signal, the children stood again and began singing "God Bless the Master of This House." The irony of the lyrics, usually sung to the master of a private home, not an institutional workhouse, seemed lost on everyone but Eleanor. As they sang, her eyes found Martha again. The girl was watching her with that same measured gaze, but now there was something else in it, a kind of recognition, perhaps even a tentative connection. Eleanor smiled at her, a small, private smile. After a moment, Martha smiled back. Then the carol ended, and it was time to leave. The children remained standing as the visitors filed out of the dining hall, back through the austere corridors to the entrance. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily, and the coachman had kept the horses walking in circles to prevent them from getting too cold. "Well, Eleanor," her father said as they settled into the carriage, "what did you think of your first workhouse visit?" Eleanor looked back at the grey building as the carriage pulled away. Somewhere inside were hundreds of children, each with their own story, their own hopes and fears, and among them was Martha Watts, who had looked at Eleanor as if she were a person, not just a benefactor's daughter. "It was educational," she said carefully. The children seemed grateful. Cornelius nodded, satisfied with this bland assessment. "Yes, indeed. Mr. Penge runs a tight ship. Those children are fortunate in their way. They receive education, food, shelter, more than many poor children can count on." Eleanor thought about Martha's description of their daily life. The endless work, the minimal schooling, the regimented existence. Was that really fortune, or just a different kind of misfortune than starving on the streets? "They only get oranges once a year," she said quietly. "At Christmas." Her father's expression softened. "Yes, that's why our visit is important. It gives them something to look forward to, something special in their difficult lives. Once a year, one day of slightly better food, one orange, one pair of stockings, one cap, and then back to the daily grind of work and discipline." The carriage rattled through the snowy streets, taking them back to Berkeley Square, back to their world of abundance and comfort. Eleanor gazed out the window, watching London transform as they moved from east to west, from poverty to wealth. She thought about the oranges she'd smuggled to Martha and the others, a small act of rebellion, barely a drop in the ocean of need. Yet Martha's smile, that moment of connection between them, had felt significant somehow. "Could we visit again?" she asked suddenly. "Not just at Christmas, I mean." Cornelius looked surprised. "Visit the workhouse? Whatever for? To see how they're doing? To bring books, perhaps? Or—" She trailed off, seeing the confusion in her father's face. "My dear, the Christmas visit is a tradition, part of Blackwood Bank's charitable obligations. Regular visits would be unusual and unnecessary. The bank's donation supports the workhouse year-round." "But we only see the children once a year," Eleanor persisted. "How do we know if they're truly well, if they're happy?" Her father frowned slightly. "Their happiness is not the primary concern, Eleanor. The workhouse exists to provide for their basic needs and to train them for useful employment. It's not meant to be a place of enjoyment." Eleanor fell silent, recognizing the futility of argument. Her father, for all his generosity, saw workhouse charity as a duty, a responsibility of his position, not as a personal connection to the individual children within those walls. But she had made that connection. With Martha, with Betsy, with Tom. She had seen them as people, not just recipients of charity, and somehow she knew that changed everything. The remainder of the journey passed in silence, Eleanor lost in her thoughts, her father apparently content with their charitable excursion. When they arrived home, Caroline was waiting in the drawing room, ready with questions about their visit. "Was it dreadful?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "All those poor children in one place. The smell must have been atrocious." "It was perfectly fine, Caroline," Cornelius replied, accepting a cup of tea from the butler. "The children were well behaved and appropriately grateful, and Eleanor conducted herself admirably." "Did you, darling?" Caroline turned to her daughter. "You weren't frightened by it all?" "No, Mother," Eleanor said, removing her cloak and hat. "It was interesting." Interesting, what a curious word to use. Well, I suppose it's done now, and you've learned your lesson about how fortunate you are. Had she learned that lesson? Eleanor wondered as she sipped her tea. Yes, she had seen firsthand the stark contrast between her life and those of the workhouse children. But she'd learned something else too, something her mother would probably never understand. That beneath the surface, differences of circumstance, there was a fundamental sameness. Martha Watts, despite her grey uniform and workhouse upbringing, was a girl not so different from Eleanor herself. "May I be excused?" she asked, setting down her teacup. "I'm rather tired after all the excitement." Her parents nodded, and Eleanor made her escape, climbing the stairs to her bedroom where Sarah was waiting to help her change for dinner. "How was it, miss?" the maid asked eagerly, unfastening Eleanor's dress. "The workhouse?" "Different than I expected," Eleanor replied thoughtfully. "The children were real. Does that sound strange? I mean, I knew they existed, but seeing them, talking to them—" "Not strange at all, miss," Sarah assured her. "That's how it is with people. Hard to imagine them properly until you've met them face to face." "I gave away the oranges," Eleanor confided, "to a girl named Martha and her friends, and her brother Tom." Sarah smiled. "That was kind of you, miss." It wasn't enough, Eleanor said, frustrated. 6 oranges for hundreds of children, and they live there all year, not just at Christmas. They work all day, they have hardly any time for lessons or play, they wear the same clothes every day. Miss Eleanor, Sarah interrupted gently, you can't change the whole world, but you made a difference to Martha and Tom and their friends today. Sometimes that's all any of us can do. Eleanor nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. Maybe she couldn't change the whole system, but perhaps there were other small things she could do. Books, she thought again. She had shelves of them, many barely read. Could she somehow get them to the workhouse children? As Sarah helped her into her dinner dress, another elaborate affair in deep green velvet, Eleanor resolved to find a way. Today's visit wouldn't be the end of her connection to St. Bart's workhouse. Somehow she would maintain that tenuous link to Martha Watts and her world. "Is something troubling you, miss?" Sarah asked, noticing her pensive expression. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the mirror, a privileged girl in an expensive dress with every material advantage. Yet today, for the first time, she had glimpsed another life, another possibility, and it had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "No," she said softly. "Not troubling exactly. I'm just thinking." Sarah nodded, seeming to understand something of what Eleanor wasn't saying. "Thinking can be a powerful thing, miss, especially when it leads to doing." Yes, Eleanor thought as she descended for dinner, thinking, then doing. The world wouldn't change in a day, but perhaps with small actions over time, she could make some difference to the children of St. Bart's workhouse, starting with Martha Watts, a girl with serious eyes and a dignity that even the workhouse couldn't diminish. Night fell early on Christmas Day, bringing with it a hush that seemed to settle over all of London. In the workhouse, the children had been sent to their dormitories after a light supper of bread and cheese, still more generous than their usual fare, but a stark contrast to the dinner they'd enjoyed earlier. Martha sat on her narrow bed, her back against the wall, her orange cradled in her lap. Around her, other girls were similarly engaged, examining their treasures in the dim light of the single gas lamp that illuminated the dormitory. "Are you going to eat yours now?" Betsy asked, sitting cross-legged on her own bed. Martha shook her head. "Not yet. I want to make it last." She glanced around to make sure Mrs. Grimwig wasn't nearby, then reached into her apron pocket and withdrew the second orange, the one Eleanor Blackwood had slipped her. "But you can have some of this one if you like." Betsy's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "Shh," Martha cautioned, glancing toward the door. "It was from the girl who came with Mr. Blackwood. She gave me an extra one." "Why?" Betsy whispered, moving closer. Martha considered the question. It was the same one she'd asked Eleanor, and she wasn't sure she understood the answer any better now than she had then. I think she wanted to do something kind, something that was from her, not just from her father's charity." "Is she going to get in trouble?" "Only if someone tells," Martha said, giving Betsy a meaningful look. "So we won't tell, will we?" Betsy shook her head solemnly. "No, it'll be our secret." Martha carefully began to peel the orange, her cold fingers working slowly to keep the peel in one piece. The scent rose immediately, sharp, sweet, exotic, making her mouth water in anticipation. "Look," she whispered to Betsy, "I'm keeping the peel. If you hang it by the fire to dry, it curls up all pretty, and it keeps the smell for weeks." "Really?" Betsy watched, fascinated, as Martha set the spiral of peel aside on her blanket. With painstaking care, Martha separated the orange into segments, dividing it evenly. "Here," she said, offering half to Betsy. Your very own orange segments. Betsy took them reverently, holding them in her cupped hands as if they were made of gold. "Thank you, Martha," she whispered, her eyes shining. "This is the best Christmas ever." Martha smiled, though there was a tightness in her throat. The best Christmas ever, in a cold workhouse dormitory with a shared orange and new woolen stockings. How low the bar was set for happiness here. "Try it," she encouraged, watching as Betsy took her first cautious bite. The little girl's face transformed with wonder. "It's so sweet," she exclaimed, forgetting to keep her voice down. "And juicy." Several other girls looked over, curious about the commotion. Martha put a finger to her lips, then beckoned to Nancy and Emma. "Come share," she whispered, but quietly. The four girls huddled together on Martha's bed, passing around the orange segments, each taking tiny bites to make the experience last longer. The sweet juice was a shock to palates accustomed to the bland, starchy food of the workhouse, a burst of sunshine in the depths of winter. "The rich girl gave you this?" Nancy asked, licking juice from her fingers. "Why?" Martha thought about Eleanor Blackwood, her fine clothes, her obvious discomfort, the way she'd looked at the workhouse children with curiosity rather than pity. "I don't know exactly," she admitted, "but she seemed nice, different from what you'd expect." "Different how?" Emma wanted to know. "She asked about us, about school and play and what our days are like. She seemed to really want to know." "Maybe she'll come back," Betsy suggested hopefully. Martha doubted it. The wealthy had their Christmas charity, their one day of remembering the poor, and then returned to their lives of comfort and plenty. Still, there had been something in Eleanor's eyes, something that suggested she wasn't merely playing at charity. "Maybe," she said, not wanting to crush Betsy's optimism. "Anyway, we have our oranges and stockings. That's something to be grateful for." The last segment of the shared orange was gone now, leaving only sticky fingers and the lingering scent. Martha carefully gathered the peel and set it on the windowsill where the cold air would begin to dry it. "What about your other orange?" Betsy asked. "The official one." Martha picked it up, turning it in her hands. "I'm saving it for later." "When's later?" Martha smiled. "When I need it most. When it's been so long since Christmas that I've almost forgotten what an orange tastes like. Then I'll eat it and remember today." Betsy looked at her own orange, the official one, with new consideration. "I think I'll save mine too," she decided. "Like you." From across the dormitory came the sound of the door opening. Mrs. Grimwig entered, her face stern as usual despite the holiday. "Lights out in 10 minutes, girls," she announced. "Back to your own beds now. No more chattering." The girls dispersed, returning to their places. Martha helped Betsy with her blanket, tucking it around her thin shoulders. "Merry Christmas, Betsy," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, Martha," the little girl replied, already half asleep, the excitement of the day catching up with her at last. Martha settled into her own bed, placing her remaining orange carefully under her pillow for safekeeping. Above, through the small high window, she could see a patch of night sky where the clouds had momentarily parted. Stars glittered in the blackness, cold, distant points of light in an otherwise dark world. She wondered if Eleanor Blackwood could see the same stars from her window in the wealthy part of London. Probably not, she decided. The rich girl's windows were likely bigger, with a better view, not these narrow slits that let in more cold than light. Still, it was the same sky over all of London, the same stars shining down on rich and poor alike. There was something comforting in that thought. Martha closed her eyes, the taste of orange still on her tongue, the smell of the peel still in the air. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life. A life where oranges weren't once-a-year treasures. A life where she and Tom had a home again with a fire and a family and enough to eat. It was a dangerous dream, one that could lead to discontent with her lot. But on Christmas night, perhaps such dreams were permitted, even in the workhouse. With that thought, she drifted into sleep, her hand curled protectively around the orange beneath her pillow. Across London, in her bedroom on Berkeley Square, Eleanor sat at her window seat, gazing out at the same night sky. Snow was falling again, adding to the blanket that covered the square below. The house was quiet, her parents having retired early after the exertions of the day. On her lap lay her sketchbook, open to a half-finished drawing of Martha Watts. Eleanor had been trying to capture the workhouse girl's expression, that mixture of dignity and wariness, pride and resignation. She wasn't sure she'd succeeded, but the act of drawing had helped her process the day's experiences. The workhouse visit had affected her more deeply than she'd anticipated. She couldn't stop thinking about the children there, about their regimented lives, their limited horizons, their careful preservation of the small pleasures they were allowed. Most of all, she couldn't stop thinking about Martha. There had been a moment when their eyes met across the dining hall, when Eleanor had felt a connection that transcended their vastly different circumstances. Not pity, not charity, but something approaching understanding, as if, despite everything that separated them, they recognized something in each other. "Miss Eleanor," Sarah's voice came softly from the doorway. "I've brought your hot chocolate." Eleanor turned from the window, smiling at the maid. "Thank you, Sarah. You can put it on the table." Sarah set down the tray, but didn't immediately leave. She glanced at the sketchbook. "Is that one of the workhouse children, miss?" Eleanor nodded. "Her name is Martha Watts. She's about my age, I think. She was different from what I expected." "Different how, miss?" Eleanor considered this. "Stronger, I suppose, not beaten down by it all. There was a dignity about her, as if the workhouse was something that happened to her, but it wasn't who she was." Sarah nodded, understanding. "Some people are like that. They go through terrible things, but they don't let those things define them." "I gave her one of the extra oranges," Eleanor said, "and her brother Tom, and some of the other children too." "I'm glad, miss," Sarah replied, straightening Eleanor's bed covers. "It was a kind thing to do." "It wasn't enough," Eleanor said, frustration seeping into her voice. 6 oranges out of hundreds of children, and they're still there, in that place, with its rules and work and greyness. Nothing's really changed for them. Sarah paused in her tasks, regarding Eleanor thoughtfully. "If I may say so, miss, something has changed. You've seen them now. You know they exist, as real people with names and faces, not just as the poor or the workhouse children. That matters." Eleanor considered this. "I suppose you're right, but I want to do more, Sarah. I want to, I don't know, help somehow." "Perhaps you can," Sarah suggested. "You have books they'd never see. You could ask your father if you might donate some to the workhouse school. Do you think he'd allow it?" "He might, especially if you present it as an educational charity rather than a personal connection." Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities. Books would be a start, but maybe there could be more. Maybe she could convince her father to increase the bank's donation, or to visit more than once a year, or to establish a fund specifically for the children's education. "Thank you, Sarah," she said, her spirits lifting. "That's an excellent idea." The maid smiled. "Just doing my job, miss. Will there be anything else?" "No, thank you. Good night." After Sarah left, Eleanor returned to her window seat, sipping her hot chocolate and watching the falling snow. She picked up her sketchbook again, adding details to her drawing of Martha, the serious set of her mouth, the watchful intelligence in her eyes. It was strange to think that they had been born in the same city, perhaps even in the same year, yet their lives had taken such different paths. Eleanor had never known hunger or cold or the loss of family. Martha had known all three, and at a young age. What had shaped her into the person she was? What would Eleanor herself have become, born to different circumstances? She closed her sketchbook, setting it aside. Such questions had no answers, at least none that she could discern at 11 years old. But they were worth asking, worth considering. They changed how she saw the world. The chocolate was cooling now, but still delicious, rich and sweet, with a dollop of cream on top. Eleanor drank it slowly, savouring each sip. She thought of Martha, carefully dividing her orange, making it last. There was a lesson there, she thought, about appreciation and gratitude. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the city. Eleanor imagined it falling on St. Bart's workhouse too, covering its grim facade with clean white, if only temporarily. She pictured Martha at her own window, perhaps looking at the same stars, the same snow. Connected, somehow, despite everything that divided them. With that thought, Eleanor finally climbed into her four-poster bed, pulling the warm blankets up to her chin. Tomorrow would be Boxing Day, another holiday for her, another day of relative leisure. For Martha, it would mean a return to work, to the routines of workhouse life. But something had changed. For both of them, a connection had been made, a window opened between two worlds, and neither girl would see Christmas or oranges in quite the same way again. As Eleanor drifted towards sleep, she made a silent promise to herself and to the girl she'd met that day. This wouldn't be the end of their connection. Somehow, someday, she would find a way back to St. Bart's workhouse, back to Martha Watts. The how and when of it remained to be seen. But the intention was set, as clear and bright as the stars visible through breaks in the snowy clouds. And across London, Martha Watts slept with an orange under her pillow and the taste of unexpected kindness still sweet on her tongue. Outside, the snow fell on rich and poor alike, covering London in a temporary blanket of white that made all things, for a moment, seem equal. Tomorrow would bring its usual divisions, its stark contrasts between privilege and poverty. But tonight, under the same stars and the same snow, two girls from different worlds dreamed of oranges, of connection, and of possibilities neither had imagined before this Christmas Day. As you lie in your own bed now, warm and comfortable, think of these two girls from long ago, of Martha with her treasured orange and quiet dignity, of Eleanor with her awakening conscience and determination to make a difference, however small. Their story reminds us that Christmas has always been about more than presents or feasts. At its heart, it's about connection, across divisions of wealth and status, across the barriers we build between ourselves and others. It's about seeing one another, truly seeing and recognizing our shared humanity. The workhouses are gone now, consigned to history. But the need for that recognition, that connection, remains as vital today as it was in Victorian London. And as you drift towards sleep, perhaps you'll carry with you the scent of oranges, the softness of snow falling, and the reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures, an extra orange, a moment of genuine seeing, can create ripples that extend far beyond what we might imagine. Sweet dreams, and Merry Christmas.